I was literally shocked the first time I went grocery shopping in the UK. Seriously, I need you to picture this. I've been living in Britain for almost 2 years now. I am an American through and through, born and raised, and when I first moved here, the realization of what I had been eating my entire life in the United States and why so many of those exact same foods are straight up illegal here in Europe. We need to talk about this, because here is the truth. Americans are being fed things that the rest of the developed world considers toxic, dangerous, or completely unfit for human consumption. And I had no idea until I tried to buy a bag of Skittles in London. Also, very quickly, I checked the analytics, and apparently 87% of you are watching without subscribing, which is honestly wild to me because if you're still here listening to me unravel over British life, you are very much the target audience. So subscribe if you want more of this because trust me, I am nowhere near done. So let me set the scene. I had been living in the UK for maybe 3 weeks. I was homesick. I just wanted a taste of home, a little sugar rush. So I walked into my local Sainsbury's, which is a grocery store here, and I bought a bag of Skittles. I ripped them open, popped a handful in my mouth, and I immediately knew something was off. They didn't look as neon, and they tasted different. Not bad, just not like the hyper-artificial rainbow I was used to. So I turned the bag around and looked at the ingredients. Where were the red 40, the yellow 5, the titanium dioxide? Nowhere. I started Googling right there in the candy aisle, and my jaw dropped. Did you know that titanium dioxide, the chemical used in the United States to give Skittles and other candies their smooth, bright colors, is literally banned in the European Union and is heavily restricted and phased out here in the UK? Yes, titanium dioxide, the exact same chemical used in sunscreen, house paint, and plastics to make them stark white. The European Food Safety Authority, or EFSA, banned it in 2022 as a food additive. Why? Because after extensive research, they could not rule out genotoxicity. For those who aren't science nerds, genotoxicity means the chemical might have the ability to damage your DNA, which can lead to cancer. The Europeans looked at this and said, absolutely not. We are not feeding DNA-damaging paint chemicals to our children just so their candy looks a little shinier. But in the US, the FDA basically says, it's fine in small amounts. In the US, we would never let an abundance of caution get in the way of a vibrant piece of candy. And that is when the glass completely shattered for me. I realized that the American versions of global products are entirely different formulations. Let's shuffle things up and talk about bread. Because this is another thing that absolutely baffled me when I first moved to the UK. I bought a loaf of sliced bread, left it on my counter, and 3 days later, it was green, covered in mold. I was furious. I was like, what is wrong with British bread? In America, I could leave a loaf of Wonder Bread in my pantry for 3 weeks, take it out, and it would still be as squishy and soft as a memory foam mattress. Well, there is a very dark reason for that, and it's called potassium bromate, along with its awful cousin, azodicarbonamide. Let's break this down because this is wild. Potassium bromate is an oxidizing agent. American commercial bakeries love it because it strengthens the dough, allows it to rise higher, and gives the bread that perfectly uniform, fluffy, bright white texture. The problem? Potassium bromate is a category 2B carcinogen. It has been shown to cause cancer in thyroid and kidney cells in animal testing. It is banned in the UK. It is banned in the European Union. It is banned in Canada. It is banned in China. Think about that. Even China, a country not exactly famous for its strict environmental and safety regulations, looked at American bread and said, yeah, no thanks, that's poison. But in the US, the FDA allows it. And then there's azodicarbonamide. You might remember the huge scandal a few years ago when it came out that Subway was using the yoga mat chemical in their bread. That's azodicarbonamide. It's used to bleach flour and make dough more elastic. It is literally the exact same chemical used to manufacture foamed plastics like yoga mats and the soles of your sneakers. Europe banned it entirely from food products because when it breaks down during baking, it forms urethane, which is a recognized carcinogen. If you are caught using azodicarbonamide in food in the UK, you can literally go to prison for up to 15 years. Prison. Over a dough conditioner. Meanwhile, in the US, it is still floating around in hundreds of commercial baked goods, fast food buns, and pastries. Also, if you want the version of this channel that feels a bit more close up, join the membership below. That's where the extra stories live. The behind-the-scenes thoughts live, and where I say a little more than I probably should. Yeah, so let's continue where we left off. You see, living in the UK, my palate has completely changed, but more importantly, my understanding of how a society should protect its citizens has completely changed. Why do Brits think this way versus Americans? It comes down to a fundamental psychological and legal difference in how our governments operate. We have to dive into the history of this because it explains everything. In Europe, and retained in the UK post-Brexit, food regulation is based on something called the precautionary principle. This is a brilliant concept. The precautionary principle essentially states that if a chemical or an additive might cause harm to the public, the burden of proof is on the manufacturer to prove that it is 100% safe before it can be sold. You want to put a new blue dye in a cupcake? Prove to us, with extensive independent scientific data, that it won't hurt anyone. If there is even a shadow of a doubt, it doesn't go on the shelf. Now, look at the United States. The US operates on a risk-based approach, heavily influenced by corporate lobbying. But the real villain in the US food system is a massive, gaping legal loophole called GRAS. GRAS. It stands for Generally Recognized as Safe. This loophole was created way back in 1958 with the Food Additives Amendment. The idea was that certain things like salt, vinegar, or baking soda had been used for centuries and obviously didn't need to go through rigorous FDA testing. Makes sense, right? But over the decades, massive food corporations lobbied to expand this definition. Today, a food company can invent a completely new synthetic chemical in a lab, pay their own hand-picked scientists to evaluate it, and then simply declare it GRAS. They don't even have to inform the FDA before they put it in your food. The FDA literally operates blindly, waiting for consumers to get sick before they investigate. In the US, the burden of proof is on the consumer to prove that a chemical is making them sick, rather than the corporation proving it's safe. It is literally a guilty until proven innocent system, but for public health, this leads me straight into the drinks aisle. Have you ever drank a Mountain Dew? You know, that cloudy neon green color and that intense citrus flavor that somehow doesn't separate? For decades, the secret ingredient keeping the flavoring from floating to the top of your Mountain Dew was something called brominated vegetable oil, or BVO. I was literally shocked when I found out what this actually is. BVO is vegetable oil bonded with bromine. Bromine is a toxic, corrosive element that is primarily used as a flame retardant in furniture and plastics. Yes, you heard me. Flame retardant. When you consume BVO, the bromine can build up in your body's fatty tissues. Over time, extreme consumption of BVO has been linked to memory loss, skin issues, and nerve problems. Europe banned BVO decades ago. They looked at it and said, "Why are we putting flame retardants in a citrus soda? Just shake the bottle if the flavor separates." But in America, BVO was heavily used in sodas, sports drinks, and citrus waters for nearly a century. The FDA is only just now in the 2020 finally making moves to revoke its safe status, long after millions of Americans have chugged thousands of gallons of the stuff. When I tell my British friends about this, they look at me like I grew up on a toxic waste dump. They simply cannot fathom why an advanced, wealthy nation would allow its citizens to ingest flame retardants, just so a soda looks slightly more appealing. And speaking of appealing, let's talk about food dyes, because this is a highly emotional topic. We all know the American classics, Kraft macaroni and cheese, with that glowing radioactive orange powder, Fruit Loops that look like brightly painted jewelry, Kool-Aid, Doritos. In America, we eat with our eyes, and food corporations know that bright colors sell products, especially to children. But those colors come at a heavy cost. Red 40, Yellow 5, and Yellow 6 are synthetic petroleum-based dyes. Yes, petroleum. They are derived from crude oil. Now, I need to bring up a massive historical touchstone that completely shifted European food policy, and it's called the Southampton 6 study. In 2007, researchers at Southampton University here in the UK conducted a massive, rigorous, double-blind study on children. They found a definitive, undeniable link between the consumption of these artificial dyes, specifically Red 40, Yellow 5, and Yellow 6, and increased hyperactivity and ADHD-like symptoms in children. The European Union took one look at that study and took immediate action. They didn't ban the dyes outright immediately, but they did something incredibly smart. They passed a law stating that any food product containing these synthetic dyes must carry a large, highly visible warning label that says may have an adverse effect on activity and attention in children. Now, put yourself in the shoes of a massive corporation like Kellogg's or Kraft. Are you going to put a giant warning label on your cereal box telling moms that your product might make their kids erratic and hyperactive? Of course not. So practically overnight, food companies in Europe completely reformulated their products. They switched to natural colorings. In the UK, Fruit Loops are colored with spinach extract, carrot juice, and beetroot. They don't look as neon, they look a little muted, but they taste exactly the same, and they don't alter a child's brain chemistry. But what happened in America? The FDA reviewed the exact same Southampton study, shrugged their shoulders, and said the evidence isn't conclusive enough to mandate a warning label. So the American versions of these exact same foods still contain the petroleum dyes. Kraft, Kellogg's, Mars, they all know how to make their products without synthetic dyes because they do it every single day for the European market. But they continue to use the toxic stuff in America because it is pennies cheaper and the US government lets them get away with it. When I realized that these mega corporations were intentionally feeding a lower quality, more toxic version of their product to my family back home just to save a fraction of a cent per unit, I was sick to my stomach. It is a profound betrayal. Let's take a sharp left turn and talk about meat. Oh boy, the meat. If you ever want to see a British person visibly gag, just say the words chlorinated chicken. When Brexit was happening, there was a massive public outcry in the UK about the possibility of having to accept American meat imports. Protesters literally marched in the streets dressed as giant chickens protesting US food standards. I didn't get it at first. I thought, what's wrong with our chicken? Here's the truth. In the United States, after chickens are slaughtered, they are often plunged into a massive bath of chlorine dioxide and other chemical disinfectants. When Europeans hear this, they are horrified, but the American counterargument is always, hey, the chlorine wash is completely safe, it's just like swimming in a pool, and it kills salmonella. We are keeping the food safe, but that is completely missing the point. The psychological difference between the two cultures is so stark here. In Europe, the philosophy is that animals should be raised in environments clean enough and humane enough that they don't become diseased in the first place. The UK has incredibly strict animal welfare standards. Chickens must have a certain amount of space, light, and sanitation. Because the farms are clean, the birds are clean, and therefore the meat doesn't need to be chemically bleached at the end of the line. In the US, the agricultural system is hyper-industrialized. Chickens are packed into massive, dark, filthy warehouses, thousands of them crammed together, walking around in their own feces. Disease is rampant. The American approach is to ignore the horrific, unsanitary conditions of the farm and just chemically blast the carcass at the end of the slaughter line to hide the evidence. Europe bans chlorinated chicken, not because the chlorine itself will kill you, but because the need to use chlorine proves that the animal was raised in a highly unsanitary, legally unacceptable environment. It is a fundamental difference in values. Europe regulates the process. America just tries to sanitize the aftermath. And the meat situation gets even darker when you look at pork. Let me introduce you to a drug called ractopamine. Ractopamine is a beta agonist drug commonly used as an asthma medication in humans, but in the American meat industry, it is fed to pigs, cows, and turkeys right before slaughter. Why? Because it acts as a growth promoter. It artificially speeds up heart rates, stresses the animals out, and causes them to rapidly pack on lean muscle mass instead of fat right at the very end of their lives. It means more meat per animal, which means more profit. The downside? Ractopamine is so potent that it can cause pigs to collapse, break their own limbs, and suffer immense cardiovascular stress. It is a nightmare for animal welfare. Furthermore, residues of this drug remain in the meat that ends up on your dinner plate. Ractopamine is banned in 160 countries. Let me repeat that. 160 countries, including the entirety of the EU, the UK, Russia, and mainland China, refuse to import American pork because of ractopamine residues. The drug has been linked to heart issues and elevated heart rates in humans who consume the tainted meat. Yet, in the United States, the FDA allows it, and the pork industry continues to use it because it boosts their profit margins. It is deeply disturbing that American consumers are the dumping ground for chemically altered meat that literally the rest of the planet refuses to touch. Now, let's talk about milk. If you pour a glass of milk in the US and pour a glass of milk in the UK, you might think they are the exact same thing. They are not. I noticed almost immediately that British milk tastes richer and honestly goes bad a little faster, but I will gladly take milk that sours in a week over what is happening in the American dairy industry. Back in the 1990s, the chemical giant Monsanto introduced something called RBGH, or recombinant bovine growth hormone. It's a genetically engineered hormone injected into dairy cows to force them to produce significantly more milk than they naturally would. Sounds great for farmers, right? More milk, more money. But the collateral damage is staggering. Cows injected with RBGH suffer from significantly higher rates of clinical mastitis, which is a painful infection of the udders. Because their udders are infected, the cows are pumped full of antibiotics. Because they have infections, pus gets into the milk. Yes, pus. And to top it all off, the milk from RBGH-treated cows has elevated levels of IGF-1, a hormone that has been linked to an increased risk of breast, prostate, and colon cancers in humans. When RBGH was introduced, the European Union evaluated it, saw the horrific animal welfare implications and the potential human cancer risks, and banned it completely. Canada banned it, Australia banned it, Japan banned it. In America, the FDA approved it, and for decades, Americans have been unknowingly drinking milk from hormonally altered, chronically infected cows. Now, to be fair, in recent years, consumer backlash in the US has forced many dairies to voluntarily stop using RBGH, which is why you see RBST-free labels on milk cartons now. But the fact remains that the US government never banned it. They never stepped in to protect the consumer. The only reason things are slightly improving is because everyday mums and dads started voting with their wallets. In the US, we would never expect the government to protect us proactively. We have to do the exhausting research ourselves, which brings me to a massive, overarching psychological and structural question. Why? Why does America allow this? Why is the US food system so inherently toxic compared to Europe? When I talk to Americans back home, the counter-argument I always hear is about freedom and cheap food. They say, well, the US allows more additives, so we have more choices, and food is cheaper. We don't want a nanny state telling us what we can and cannot eat. But let's completely dismantle that illusion of choice. Do you really have a choice when a mega corporation hides 70 different synthetic chemicals under the word artificial flavors? Do you have a choice when food deserts mean millions of Americans only have access to a Dollar General packed with ultra-processed, chemically laden foods? It's not freedom, it is corporate manipulation. And let's talk about the cheap food argument. Yes, at the checkout counter, a box of heavily subsidized, chemically preserved American snacks might seem cheaper, but you are paying for it on the back end. You are paying for it with the highest rates of obesity, type 2 diabetes, autoimmune diseases, and early onset colon cancer in the developed world. This is where my time in the UK has given me the biggest revelation, and it all comes down to healthcare. This is the structural secret nobody talks about. In the UK and in most of Europe, there is universal healthcare. The National Health Service, the NHS, is funded by the government, which means it is funded by taxpayers. If millions of British people get sick from toxic food, develop diabetes, or get cancer from banned chemicals, the British government is on the hook for billions of pounds in medical treatments. Therefore, the government has a massive direct financial incentive to keep its citizens healthy. Keeping carcinogens and toxic dyes out of the food supply literally saves the government money. In the United States, healthcare is a privatized trillion-dollar for-profit industry. The government doesn't lose money if you get sick. In fact, massive medical conglomerates, pharmaceutical companies, and insurance corporations make billions of dollars off of chronic illness. There is absolutely no financial incentive at the federal level to proactively keep the population healthy through strict food regulations. The food industry makes billions making you sick, and the healthcare industry makes billions treating your sickness. It is a closed-loop system of profit, and the American consumer is the one paying the price with their lifespan. I was literally shocked when I put that together. The realization that our regulatory agencies are essentially compromised by the very industries they are supposed to be regulating. Take the Farm Bill in the US, for example. The billions of dollars in subsidies don't go to broccoli farmers or local organic dairies. They go to commodity crops like corn and soy. This is why high fructose corn syrup is in literally everything in America. Bread, pasta sauce, salad dressing, ketchup, it is completely inescapable. In the UK, sure, people eat junk food. The British love a good biscuit, they love chocolate, they love chips or crisps as they call them here. But the baseline of the food is different. If I buy a bag of Walker's crisps here, the ingredients are potatoes, sunflower oil, and salt. If I look at the equivalent American potato chip, there are often 15 ingredients, including MSG, artificial colors, and preservatives like BHA and BHT. Let's pause and talk about BHA and BHT. Butylated hydroxyanisole and butylated hydroxytoluene. These are synthetic antioxidants used to prevent oils from going rancid. You will find them in almost every cereal box liner and snack bag in America to give the products a shelf life of 3 years. They are derived from petroleum. The National Institutes of Health in the US literally classifies BHA as reasonably anticipated to be a human carcinogen. Yet, it is still in the food. In Europe, BHA and BHT are heavily restricted or outright banned in food production. If a British cereal company wants to keep their cornflakes fresh, they use vitamin E, a natural preservative. But in America, vitamin E costs a little bit more than petroleum byproducts, so the corporations choose the petroleum. Living in the UK for the past 2 years has been an incredible experience, but it has fundamentally changed my relationship with my home country. It has given me the most profound reverse culture shock. When I go back to the US to visit my family now, I am terrified of the grocery store. I spend hours reading labels. I taste the chemicals in things I used to love. The tap water tastes like a swimming pool, the bread tastes like cake, and the candy makes my teeth ache and my head throb. We need to talk about this because the American public deserves better. We are a wealthy, innovative nation. There is absolutely no reason why we cannot have food that is safe, wholesome, and free from neurotoxins, carcinogens, and flame retardants. We shouldn't have to rely on blogs and expensive organic supermarkets just to find food that won't slowly kill us. If you take anything away from my experience as an American expat living in Europe, let it be this: start reading your labels. Don't trust that just because it is on the shelf. The FDA has your best interests at heart. Look out for potassium bromate, look out for Red 40, look out for titanium dioxide and BHA, because the truth is the rest of the world has already woken up to the reality of the American food system, and they have built walls to keep our food out. It is time we start demanding the exact same standards for ourselves, because honestly, once you realize that your favorite childhood snack is illegal in 30 countries because it causes tumors in lab rats, you can never look at a grocery store the same way again. I know I can't, and as much as I miss the convenience of American shopping, I will take the slightly faster molding bread and the dull-colored Skittles every single day of the week, knowing that what I am putting into my body is actually food and not a science experiment.